There is a conversation that happens in hospitals, in doctors' offices, in households, and in arguments between couples that has been going on for a very long time. A man gets a cold, and the household restructures around his suffering. A woman goes through labor, recovers, makes breakfast, and asks if anyone needs anything. A man gets a paper cut and announces it. A woman sprains her ankle and asks if she can still go to work. This is not a new observation. People have been noticing this pattern for centuries. But what most people do not know, what even a lot of doctors did not fully understand until relatively recently, is that this difference is not just personality. It is not just social conditioning. It is not just women being tougher or men being dramatic. The difference in how men and women experience, process, and tolerate pain is biological, neurological, hormonal, and deeply embedded in human physiology in ways that researchers are still working to fully map. And yes, social conditioning plays a role too. Both things are true at the same time. The full story is more interesting than either the biology-only or the socialization-only explanation, and it touches on genetics, hormones, brain structure, evolutionary history, and the genuinely strange way the human nervous system handles pain differently depending on whose nervous system it is. So let us get into it. Why do women, on average, tolerate pain better than men? What is actually happening in the body and brain? And why did this difference exist in the first place? Subscribe to Freud Mind for more, and let us talk about pain. First, a clarification that matters. When researchers talk about pain tolerance versus pain sensitivity, they are describing two different things that often get conflated. Pain sensitivity is how strongly you perceive a painful stimulus, how much it registers, how intense the signal feels. Pain tolerance is how long you can endure a painful experience before you cannot take it anymore. These are separate measurements, and the findings on men and women are more nuanced than a single headline suggests. What research consistently finds is that women, on average, report higher pain sensitivity, meaning they feel pain more intensely, more frequently, and with more complexity than men do. Women are more likely to experience chronic pain conditions. Women tend to have lower pain thresholds on clinical tests, meaning pain registers for them at lower stimulus intensities. In a straightforward reading of these numbers, women feel more pain than men. But women also demonstrate significantly higher pain tolerance in many contexts, meaning they can endure and continue functioning through pain that would cause men to stop. They give birth. They manage chronic conditions that would be debilitating in a different context. They push through discomfort in ways that behavioral research and clinical observation consistently document. So the accurate framing is not that women feel less pain. They often feel more. What they have is a different relationship with pain, a capacity to function alongside it, manage it, and continue operating through levels of discomfort that men typically do not face in the same way. Understanding why requires looking at several different systems at once. Start with hormones, because hormones are where a significant portion of this story lives. Estrogen, the primary female sex hormone, has a complex relationship with pain that researchers have spent decades trying to fully understand. Estrogen interacts with opioid receptors in the brain, which are the same receptors that respond to the body's natural painkillers, endorphins, and to drugs like morphine. In certain concentrations and contexts, estrogen enhances the activity of these opioid receptors, making the body's natural pain relief system more efficient. This is one of the reasons women's pain tolerance fluctuates across the menstrual cycle. When estrogen levels are higher, pain tolerance tends to be higher too. When estrogen drops, in the days before menstruation or after menopause, pain sensitivity often increases. This is not a small fluctuation. Women with conditions like migraines, fibromyalgia, and temporomandibular joint disorder, all chronic pain conditions, frequently report that their symptoms worsen at specific points in the hormonal cycle. The pain system is not a fixed baseline. It is a dynamic, hormonally modulated system that shifts constantly. And in women, that modulation is more pronounced and more variable than in men. Testosterone, on the other hand, the primary male sex hormone, appears to have a dampening effect on pain perception in certain contexts. Studies on men with higher testosterone levels show higher pain thresholds on average. Research on transgender individuals who undergo hormonal transition has provided some of the clearest evidence for this relationship. People transitioning from male to female, taking estrogen and testosterone blockers, report increases in pain sensitivity. People transitioning from female to male, taking testosterone, often report decreases in pain sensitivity. The hormonal shift produces measurable changes in how the nervous system processes pain, and the direction of those changes follows the hormones. But hormones are only part of the picture. The brain itself processes pain differently in men and women, and brain imaging research over the last 2 decades has produced findings that surprised a lot of researchers who expected the differences to be minor. The experience of pain involves multiple brain regions, not just the sensory areas that register where it hurts and how much, but emotional processing areas, memory areas, attention areas, and regions involved in anticipation and context. Pain is not just a signal from the body to the brain saying something is wrong. It is an experience constructed by the brain using sensory input, emotional state, memory, expectation, and social context all at once. What brain imaging studies show is that the emotional processing component of pain, the part that handles the suffering aspect rather than just the sensation aspect, is more strongly activated in women than in men for equivalent painful stimuli. Women are not just feeling the sensation of pain more intensely in many cases. They are processing the emotional and psychological dimensions of it through a more actively engaged network of brain regions. This sounds like it would make pain worse, and in terms of intensity and complexity, it often does. But it also means women are processing pain more fully, integrating it into a richer emotional and cognitive context rather than experiencing it as a raw, aversive signal. And there is evidence that this richer processing, counterintuitively, contributes to better coping. When pain is integrated into a fuller emotional and cognitive understanding, when the brain can place it in context, connect it to meaning, process the emotional weight of it, it may be more manageable over time than pain that is experienced primarily as a raw, undifferentiated, aversive sensation. There is also a genetic dimension to this that is relatively recent research and worth paying attention to. In 2021, a study published in the journal Brain found genetic variants associated with chronic pain that appeared at different rates in men and women. But more striking was earlier research from 2003 and subsequently replicated, finding a gene variant called COMT that affects how the brain processes dopamine and norepinephrine, both of which are involved in pain modulation. This gene variant exists in several forms and is present in both sexes, but its interaction with estrogen means that its effects on pain are significantly different in women than in men. Women with certain forms of this gene variant are significantly more likely to develop chronic pain conditions and to report higher pain sensitivity. But this same variant, in the context of estrogen's interaction with it, also appears to be associated with more active pain coping mechanisms. The genetics of pain is complicated, and researchers are careful not to overstate single gene findings. But the emerging picture is consistent. The pain system in women is not just a slightly modified version of the male pain system. It is a differently configured system, with different hormonal modulators, different genetic interactions, and different brain activation patterns. Saying women tolerate pain better than men without acknowledging that they are working with a fundamentally different version of the pain system is leaving out most of the story. Now here is where evolutionary biology enters, and it is where the story gets genuinely interesting rather than just anatomically informative. Why would the female pain system be configured this way? What is the evolutionary logic behind higher pain sensitivity combined with higher tolerance and more sophisticated coping mechanisms? The most compelling answer involves reproduction, specifically childbirth. Human birth is, by the standards of any mammal, extraordinarily painful. The human infant's large head, a consequence of the massive brain that makes humans the cognitive species they are, has to pass through a birth canal that is narrow due to the constraints of bipedal walking. This mismatch, large head, narrow pelvis, produces a birth process that is painful, dangerous, and prolonged in a way that is essentially unique among primates. Natural selection, acting on women over hundreds of thousands of years, has been selecting for the ability to survive and function through this experience. Women who could not tolerate the pain of childbirth, who were incapacitated or unable to cope, were less likely to successfully deliver, less likely to survive, and less likely to pass on their genes. The pain tolerance required to get through childbirth is not just a nice ability to have. For most of human evolutionary history, it was life or death. This does not mean women were selected to feel less pain during childbirth. The evidence suggests they feel an enormous amount. It means they were selected for the neural and hormonal machinery that allows functioning, coping, and survival alongside extreme pain. The pain is there. The system to manage it is also there, and it is more developed than in men. There is another evolutionary angle that is less often discussed, but equally interesting. Women, across human evolutionary history, were more likely than men to be the primary caregivers for children and other vulnerable group members. A caregiver who is incapacitated by their own pain cannot care for dependents. A hunter who is incapacitated by pain can stop hunting and rest. The social roles that shaped human evolution may have placed different functional demands on the pain systems of men and women, not because men were weaker, but because the consequences of being stopped by pain were different. This is not a statement about social roles being natural or correct. It is an observation about what the evolutionary pressures may have been and how they might have differentially shaped two separate pain systems over a very long period of time. The social conditioning piece deserves honest attention here, because it is real and it compounds the biological differences rather than replacing them. Boys in most human cultures are explicitly or implicitly trained to suppress pain expression from a very young age. Do not cry. Walk it off. Be tough. These messages are not subtle, and they are delivered early and often. The result is not that boys feel less pain. The evidence is clear that they do not feel significantly less pain than girls at equivalent ages in clinical testing. The result is that boys learn to inhibit the behavioral and social expression of pain, and over time, that inhibited expression appears to feed back into the subjective experience of it. This is a genuine psychological phenomenon. The relationship between expressing pain and experiencing it is bidirectional. When you suppress the expression of pain over a long period of time, the suppression itself becomes a coping strategy that changes how the experience is processed. Men who have spent decades not expressing pain are often genuinely less consciously aware of it in the moment, not because the nerve signals are weaker, but because the processing pathway that converts the signal into acknowledged conscious experience has been inhibited by years of suppression practice. Meanwhile, women are generally given more social permission to acknowledge, express, and discuss pain. This social permission means women are more likely to seek medical attention when in pain, more likely to report symptoms accurately, and more likely to develop explicit coping strategies. The irony is that the group culturally permitted to express pain develops better pain management tools, while the group trained to suppress it ends up with neither the expression nor the coping infrastructure. There is a clinical dimension to all of this that has real consequences and is worth being direct about. For most of medical history, the default human body in medical research was male. Drug trials, pain studies, clinical models, the overwhelming majority of the foundational research was conducted on men. The assumption, often unstated, was that the male body was the standard, and the female body was a variation that would respond similarly to the same treatments. This assumption has been dismantled over the last 30 years, but its legacy persists. Women are significantly more likely to have their pain dismissed, minimized, or attributed to psychological causes by medical professionals. Studies have found that women wait longer to receive pain medication in emergency settings. Women with conditions like endometriosis, a genuinely painful condition, wait an average of 7 to 10 years for a diagnosis, in part because the pain is normalized or attributed to routine menstrual experience, rather than taken seriously as a symptom. This is not a minor statistical curiosity. It is a systematic failure that has caused significant harm, and it is rooted in a foundational misunderstanding of the pain system. The research is clear that it is not the same. The systems are different, the experience is different, and medical practice is, slowly, catching up to what the biology has been showing for decades. So, where does this leave us with the original observation? The man with the cold, the woman making breakfast after labor. The truthful answer is that it is complicated in the best way. Women, on average, experience pain more intensely and more frequently than men. Higher sensitivity, more chronic conditions, more variation across hormonal cycles. But they are also working with a pain management system that is, in many respects, more sophisticated, more integrated with emotional processing, more supported by hormonal modulation, more developed through evolutionary pressure toward functioning under extreme physical duress. Men are not faking. Their pain is real. But the system they are running is, on average, less practiced at the specific task of continuing to function alongside pain, less hormonally supported for high-tolerance endurance, less evolutionarily pressured toward the machinery of coping, and additionally, often culturally trained to suppress rather than process, which removes even the coping tools that cultural permission for expression would provide. The man with the cold is not necessarily being dramatic. He may genuinely be experiencing his body's response to discomfort through a system that has fewer tools for managing it. And the woman making breakfast after labor is not being superhuman. She is running hardware that was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years specifically for exactly that kind of situation. Neither of them chose their pain system. Both of them are working with what evolution, genetics, hormones, and culture handed them. The interesting thing is not who tolerates more or who suffers more. The interesting thing is that pain, the most universal human experience, the thing every person alive has felt, turns out to be profoundly different depending on whose nervous system is experiencing it. And medicine, neuroscience, and the rest of us are still catching up to what that actually means. Subscribe to Freud Mind for more.